We are delighted to have everybody here this morning for a discussion about what it is like to be a CCO at a large firm. The last few weeks have been interesting times, probably for many of us, between market volatility, coronavirus, travel restrictions, business contingency. So we're really glad to see as many of you here today as are in the audience. Our goal for the next hour will be to talk a little bit about what it's like to be a CCO at a large firm, what the career paths we took to get to those roles are, how we spend our time, what the challenges are that we face, and how we successfully and sometimes not so successfully face those challenges. We would love for this to be a dialogue, so please feel free to raise your hand at any point. We'll sort of go with the flow of what the audience wants to talk about if there's a lot of questions. There will also be folks from IAA who are around to take questions if you want to pass them in a card format rather than raising your hand. I'm going to do a real quick let you know who is up here on the panel before we do more in-depth introductions. We're going to allow everybody to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their career paths to get to their CCO role, because we thought that might be of interest to folks who maybe are aspiring to be a CCO. So my name is Claire Burke. I am a CCO at Vanguard. To my left, your right, is Lee Faria. Lee joins us from Columbia Threadneedle. To my right and your left is Jessica Zerges, who is joining us from Capital Group. And then in the spirit of CCOs always needing to roll with the punches, we've actually got Mark Egert from JPMorgan on the phone. So he is under travel restriction right now, and we are really, really happy that he was able to join us despite not being able to be here in person. So with that, again, please feel free to break in with questions. But we are going to go down the row and introduce ourselves and give a little bit of background about our career paths. So maybe Jessica, we'll start with you and go down the row and then kick it to Mark on the phone.
Sounds good. Thank you, Claire, and thank you everybody for being here today. I'm amazed there's so many people interested in being CCOs or learning more about it, so excited to spend the next hour with you. As Claire said, I'm a CCO at the Capital Group. If you're not familiar with that brand, it's the home of the American funds, but we actually have a number of other lines of business. So I serve as CCO for the registered investment advisor entities that oversee our high net worth and institutional client lines of business. I've been with the Capital Group for about 16 years. That's the totality of my career. And I started at CG actually in a rotational program for recent college graduates, rotating through a variety of different departments and roles, and had a number of different operational and client-facing roles over the years before about 8 years ago transitioning to our legal and compliance team at Capital, focusing specifically on our institutional business as well as registrations and investment advisor filings, Form ADVs, that type of thing. So just sort of took on successive levels of responsibility, and as we were looking to transition some of the CCO responsibilities late last year, I took on the CCO role. So I probably buried the lead there a little bit, but I am a brand new CCO, effective January 1. Our friends at the IAA assured me I was still eligible to speak on this panel, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys might have just around what it's like to be new to that role and some of the things that led me to take that on.
Thanks, Jessica. So as I mentioned before, my name is Claire Burke. I am one of Vanguard's CCOs. I do not work on the mutual fund side of the business. I am actually CCO for our advisor through which we provide end advice to clients. So I think what may be most familiar to folks is we have a hybrid robo, but we also offer advice to institutional clients, endowments, foundations, and we've got a couple of other advisory services that all roll up through the advisor I'm CCO for. I am a close to 12-year veteran at Vanguard. I spent about 6 years in our legal department and transitioned over to compliance a little over 5 years ago. I have been in my CCO role for the past 3 or so years. So I am not as new as Jessica, but still somewhat new, probably compared to some of you in the room who have held your seats for much longer. Just a little bit of background. I actually am a litigator by background. Started out working at a law firm in Washington, D.C. before I transitioned to Vanguard. And so I think what you will hear from all of us is probably a slightly different career journey. And what that may tell you is that there is no one tried and true path to being a CCO. But I think there are a lot of different skills from a number of different careers that all come into play in the CCO role.
Sure. Hi, my name is Faria. I'm a CCO at Columbia Threadneedle Investment Advisors. I'm one of 3 chief compliance officers supporting our asset management business in North America. My focus is with respect to the investment advisor business. I have a colleague who serves as the chief compliance officer for our mutual fund, and the person I report to, who's our global head of asset management compliance, is the chief compliance officer in addition for our affiliated broker-dealer that distributes our mutual funds and other securities products. I guess so far I have the most tenure in the CCO role. I've been the CCO for about 6.5 years. Sometimes it feels longer, sometimes it feels shorter, depending on the day. In terms of my career path, I started in the financial services firm about 30 years ago, right out of college. Worked in an entry-level job that I did not find very satisfactory for a couple of years and decided to go to law school. After I graduated from law school, I worked as an in-house attorney for a couple of financial services firms in Boston. Made some changes. Some of them were changes that I initiated. Some of them were corporate changes. So I've been through a lot of different sort of mergers and acquisitions. Companies that I worked for were bought and sold by other companies. I've been with Columbia, which is owned by the Ameriprise organization, for about 11 years now. And as I said, I moved into compliance about 20 years ago. When I graduated from law school, it was not something that was sort of a career path that was something that I was thinking about. But as I said, I moved into that role about 20 years ago. It was more for personal reasons, although professionally, I'm very glad that I did move into that role. About 20 years ago, I had 3 kids in 3 years, and I was looking for a job that would provide more of a work-life balance, and that was offered by a compliance position. So that's why I personally moved into compliance, but it's turned out to be a really interesting career. It's been very, very challenging. I leverage my legal background continually, and that's a little bit about me. Mark?
Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Egert, and again, I apologize for not being able to be with you because of JPMorgan's travel ban. But I think it's a testament to IAA's business resiliency plan that I can be here speaking at least. And so I have a corporate title, managing director, but more importantly, my 2 functional titles that matter the most are I'm Chief Compliance Officer for JPMorgan Investment Management, Inc. That's our, JPMorgan's largest registered investment advisor with $1.7 trillion in assets under management. And I am the head of compliance for asset management for the Americas, U.S., Canada, and LATAM. My career path, I'd say, is somewhat fortuitous and somewhat very carefully planned out. The fortuitous part was I started off at Sherman and Sterling and happened to sit in an office, share an office with somebody who worked closely with the partner handling the regulatory practice. And he got to know me, and so when my roommate's tenure was up, I was asked to do that. And that's made all the difference in the world in my career. I've done one form of regulatory counseling in one way or another for the last 30 years. So that was the fortuitous part. The more planned out and purposeful part was when I decided to take a job at SIA, now SIFMA, because I thought that would be a great springboard into the industry. And I quickly volunteered for the to be staff advisor, the different committees, and the legal and compliance roundtables, where I got to really see how others approached their jobs, what challenges they had, how they got things done. And again, that was a big help. And then I guess somewhat fortuitously, the chairman of one of the committees, I was a staff advisor, asked me to join ABN AMRO, which had, that was part of LaSalle Bank and had purchased the Chicago Corp. And I eventually rose to become chief legal officer there. So I've been a chief legal officer, I've been a law firm partner, and I've been a chief compliance officer. I've had 3 different CCO roles over the last 10 years. But yeah, I guess I started off in legal, had a mixed legal and compliance job at RBC Capital Markets, and then when I went to Cowen, that was the first time I was solely on the compliance side. And that's where I've been for 10 years. I guess one of the tips I'd say, in planning out a career path is to never stop learning and always stay connected. I think it's important for all of us, and the fact that you're here at a conference is probably saying that. But stay active in industry groups, develop networks. They say that 80% of jobs happen from connections, and certainly all my jobs, just about all of them, have come from reverse inquiries, where someone has called me or someone has referred me. Sometimes I don't even know who that person is or that they're referring me. But stay connected and never stop learning. All right, so I think that's all of us introducing ourselves and giving our career path. I think next thing we wanted to do is a little bit of a quick poll to see and ask the question, who currently in the audience, by show of hands, who currently is a chief compliance officer? Remember, I can't see you, but someone will tell me.
So Mark, we got a fair number of hands up in the room.
Good. And for those of you who are not currently a CCO, who aspires to be a CCO?
Okay, we've also got hands up. We'll see, maybe we'll ask you guys again at the end of the session if you still want to be a CCO. That might be an interesting way to wrap things up.
Well, on that note, I wanted to give a Surgeon General's warning that, on the one hand, this job can be highly rewarding, intellectually, financially, career-wise, as a matter of pride. You can call yourself the big kahuna or the top dog, but being that puts you in the crosshairs and makes you sometimes feel like you have a target on your back. So I'd say it's certainly not for the faint of heart. There are high risks in being a CCO. There's personal liability. You may have seen the New York Bar came out with a piece on February 2nd about CCO liability and made some recommendations. And that follows on 2 really good white papers that SIFMA put out in 2010 and 2015 on the role of a compliance officer. And then in 2015, it was the evolving role. And by now, a lot's happened over the last bit of time. But I think those are the really good things to read if you're serious about being a CCO. There's constant demands and challenges, often conflicting. I count maybe 7 different groups that are my constituents, meaning that they're people looking for me for answers. One is my reporting line, my boss and senior compliance management. 2 is the businesses that I support, cover, and have to oversee and monitor. 3 are the different boards. I have, I think, 4 boards that I go to and report to, and they ask some very difficult questions. 4 would be clients. I get called in front of clients all the time as the CCO, wanting to know, why should we give our money to you to manage, and do you have a strong enough compliance program? And they again ask some very difficult questions. I'd include regulators in my constituents. I'm constantly trying to establish relationships, build credibility, whether through an exam or by calling them to let them know about a market development. So it's not just a problem I'm facing, but maintaining that relationship. 6 would be all the colleagues in different parts of the firm that I have to coordinate with, collaborate with, and sometimes use as allies to get everyone to do the right thing. And then the last constituent is my staff. I take managing them very seriously, working on their career development, prodding them sometimes, recruiting good people, and being a leader. I think they look to the CCO to have vision and set a course for them. I think the expression is, managers have people reporting to them. Leaders have people following them. And, if you can get them to follow, then, everybody is a much better place.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Sure.
Sorry, you all are going to witness a little bit of awkwardness. It's going to be hard at times to tell when Mark is done talking. So, Mark, I'm sorry if I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, the only thing I'd add is that the job requires a lot of skills, a broad range of skills, judgment, ability to make tough calls, I like to say energy and passion, self-awareness, being able to persuade and motivate others to do what they need to do. Having that right balance between being the trusted advisor versus being the cop that sometimes has to, stop them to, save them from themselves. Nimbleness, constantly reprioritizing, good communication skills, and I mean like active listening skills, really, determination. Well, which leads to one of my questions, another question to the audience. What's the difference between a determined compliance officer and a Rottweiler dog? The answer is the Rottweiler dog eventually lets go. I think I heard some mock laughter. So if all that doesn't deter you, and what we're going to say in the rest of the panel, at least you can go into it with eyes wide open. And again, we're going to try to offer practical tips to be more effective throughout the panel.
Yeah. So on that note, we are going to get to practical tips, I promise, but we did think that it could be helpful to do sort of one more level setting around the panel about our structure and about the scope of our CCO responsibilities. So the way things are structured at a large firm may be very different than they are at a mid-sized firm or at a smaller firm, and it can impact sort of how you spend your time and where you focus your energy. So we thought we just would level set. Lee, maybe we'll start with you this time.
Sure. So in terms of how our group is structured, I had mentioned that I am not the only chief compliance officer in our line of business. And I rely on support provided by those other CCOs' teams. So my team, and I have about 25 people on my team, are responsible for things like investment compliance, guideline monitoring, personal trading, and similar types of administration of other types of policies, our gifts and entertainment, outside business activities, political contributions, and trade surveillance. And my team is also responsible for administering our policies and procedures and training. But there are other pockets of my sort of investment advisor compliance program that is in effect conducted by other teams that don't directly report to me. So some of the testing that's done is outside of my group. Or speaking of marketing and advertising, that's done by another group. So I get information about how that's going on a regular basis, and that's part of my sort of day-to-day. In addition, our asset management compliance group gets support from other parts of the organization. So we're part of a large financial services organization, which is helpful in a lot of respects. It can be very, very complicated, but we get sort of pockets of support for anti-money laundering, licensing and registration, privacy, and things along those lines are sort of outside of the sort of main scope of responsibility for the asset management compliance group, but we do get support from other parts of the compliance areas in the organization. So sort of harnessing all that, keeping track of sort of not only what your own team is doing, sort of what the broader compliance team is doing, and then even outside of sort of our own compliance team, understanding what's going on by the groups that support us. A lot of coordination, a lot of reporting, and it's interesting.
Yeah. Jessica, you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm one of 5 CCOs at the Capital Group. We have folks focusing on kind of different business lines and areas of responsibility. We really love compliance. So I also like to remind everybody in our business that we consider all of them compliance deputies. So we also rely on a lot of resources similar to what Lee said in terms of subject matter expertise that we've developed across a large legal and compliance team as well as our global risk management function. And so those all sort of work like clockwork, I would say, to a certain extent. We've built really robust reporting mechanisms, and we're pretty engaged as a CCO group with all of those partners within our legal and compliance and risk groups. So one of the things that I try to do is also just focus on business outreach and really making sure that they understand what their responsibilities are and also how they can use us as a resource. So I think that's one of the things we're trying to focus on as we move forward with the structure of the CCO program at Capital.
Great. Mark, you want to chime in?
Sure. So the structure of compliance at JPMorgan reflects the fact that we're a large complex financial institution. We are part of the second line of defense, us and risk, reporting independently of the business. We have one global overall CCO with about 2,000 compliance officers under him. And then there's 4 lines of business. I'm in the asset and wealth management line of business. Each of the lines of business has a CCO, and then each has a global CCO for that business, and then regional CCOs. So I'm like the Americas regional head, and I have colleagues in EMEA and APAC that report into the global head with me. I have 2 people on my staff that are CCOs themselves. So no shortage of CCOs. And one of the challenges is when the regulators come in, they're looking to me to know all the answers. A lot of what gets decided at an asset management level. And, global decisions are made, but the SEC doesn't want to hear that, right? You're the designated CCO, and they expect you to know everything and be able to explain everything. And like Lee had said about people that don't report to her, we have the same thing here at JPMorgan. There's a lot of groups that handle parts of my compliance program who I need to rely on. It's my job to hold them accountable and make sure they're doing what I want them to do. And we certainly spend a lot of time meeting with the heads of testing and monitoring to go through their plans and to tell them where I think the risks are and what they should be testing and what monitoring activity and how the surveillance should work. But in the end, that has to work well. And we're going to get to, I think, what keeps you up at night, and that's one of the things when you have to rely on other people that don't report to you.
Great. Thanks, Mark. So like all the other panelists, there are a number of CCOs at Vanguard. There's 4 of us. I report to the head of U.S. compliance, who is also the CCO for our funds. But like a lot of other large firms, our business lines and our entities are not don't have a one-to-one correspondence. And so in addition to the advisor program that I am responsible for, I also have teams that are responsible for compliance within certain of our business lines. What that means is like Lee, like Mark, like Jessica, there's a lot of matrix relationships going on both within our compliance department, but also with our business partners. And so one of the things that we have done is designate relationship managers for our business lines so that it's very clear to them who they can go to get answers. And we make sure that those relationship managers then sort of coordinate across the relevant compliance programs, since it's not always intuitive to the business which compliance program their questions align to get those answers. And so I think that is one way that we have tried to tackle some of the complexities that go along with trying to provide compliance support within a large entity. We also partner, as you've heard from other folks, very closely with the other second lines of defense organizations at Vanguard. So we work very closely with our counterpart teams within the legal department. Vanguard has recently centralized its risk organization, and like some of you we have centralized, decentralized, centralized, decentralized risk. Since I've been at Vanguard, we have re-centralized, and so we are working on really strengthening those partnerships as well. They are also on a relationship manager model, which makes things easy from a coordination perspective. And then we partner really closely with, for example, our information security organization. So there are things that we are not able to fully cover the ground on from a compliance department perspective, but we fortunately have very robust organizations either out in other second line of defense partners or within embedded compliance teams within the business. So, interesting challenges trying to coordinate across a lot of different groups at large firms. And if folks are interested in hearing more about that, I think we can spend some more time on that. But let's jump to sort of the meat of what this panel is about, which is what does a week in our lives look like? I will let any of the panelists who want to start jump in. I think we thought we would all just give you all a little bit of what do we do? How do we spend our time? Are there things that we do that maybe folks in the room who aren't CCOs wouldn't expect us to be having to devote a lot of time and energy to? And that may also raise some questions. So I don't know who wants to jump in, but happy to kick it over to any of my fellow panelists. Mark, maybe we'll start with you this time since you're on the phone. Yeah.
So I think what we're probably all going to say is similar, right? There's no such thing as a typical day, let alone a typical week. Each day for me is different and seldom what I planned. Like I work a long day, I have a lot of commuting to do, and but at the end of the day, I'm usually in meetings or on a phone call the entire day from like let's say 8:30 to 6. And then I've been trying to stay caught up all day with my emails, but that never happens. So let's say it's 6 o'clock, and now I'm starting to review my 100 emails that I haven't been able to get through, get that done, and then I kind of turn to, okay, what are my meetings tomorrow? And often I'm like working on a presentation or talking points for an important meeting the next day. So where does that leave time to be proactive and think about what's coming? I almost have to block out time in my calendar each week to work on something forward-looking instead of just putting out the fire drills. Because I'd say, I forgot to mention, but I've been at JPMorgan 4 years, and I'd say almost every day in my 4 years here, the day was, never what I expected. I have like a long to-do list, but then I have like today's to-do list when I leave the night before. And many times I never even get to that to-do list because I get in and there's a big problem, a big fire drill, sometimes multiple fire drills in one day. And so a real hard part of the job is time management. There's just never enough hours in the day. You need to be nimble, you need to prioritize. Just like what we're talking about before with business resiliency. I thought I'd be in Washington today in front of all you, and here I am. They're actually trying to drag me out to be on a call on the coronavirus situation. So you need to be able to pivot and multitask.
And Mark, it's interesting hearing you talk. We refer to that as just-in-time compliance at Vanguard, and I think we all feel like that's what we spend a lot of time doing. The proactive piece is the harder part. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Mark's week sounds very similar to mine, and mine was going to be sort of the same comment. No day is ever the same, and that's generally good. Keeps it interesting, keeps you on your toes, and just as we were talking about earlier about how our organizations are structured, and similar to Mark. Most of my day, unfortunately, is filled with meetings. I usually start my day a little bit earlier in the office, which helps me get a little bit of time to try to work on some things more proactively. But we work very, very closely with colleagues in Europe. So oftentimes meetings can start at 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning anyway. So I was hoping that one of my colleagues in the panel would have cracked the code on time management, but it sounds like we're all struggling with some of the same challenges.
I think, one of the other things we were chatting in advance of the panel, one of the things that I have found striking when I moved into the CCO role is that I spend very little of my time on sort of the day-to-day support of the business areas. That is my team. And one of the challenges is how far in the weeds do you go on certain topics versus, how much do you let your team cover that? I have had to increasingly get out of the weeds, which is not natural probably for a lot of folks who go into the compliance profession. We are detail-oriented folks. We're rule followers. We want to make sure we know what's going on. And I think the CCO role really requires you to take a step back, to allow others to do the day-to-day work, to make sure, though, that you have good line of sight into what is going on, and then to make sure that you have all the reporting, all the governance bodies that you need to be informed. I think the other area that I have increasingly spent a lot of time on and interested to hear from the other panelists is interactions with regulators. So we have definitely seen, and this perhaps is due to Vanguard's growth, so that may be something that others either already had regulators in a lot or are not quite there yet. But the 24-hour news cycle, anything goes bump in the night that gets featured in the press, and we get a call from the SEC. So we have really started thinking about how to be proactive with our regulators. When do we call them versus when do we let them call us? And that has taken on an increasing amount of my daily time as well.
That's interesting. I mean, I think I won't repeat a lot of what you've already heard from the rest of the panelists. I think, a lot of meetings, a lot of time spent on testing exceptions, all of those things. I think that's really table stakes. Maybe just for interest for folks, like there's other things that are happening throughout the day that are outside the scope of the CCO role, but I think are part of just leadership, which is an important part in a large organization. I help with some of our diversity and inclusion efforts. I think that's really important as we think about the future of compliance. I'm helping to think about data analytics, which is both directly and indirectly related to the CCO program, and just a lot of time kind of teeing back to what I said earlier with business outreach, relationship building, sitting on kind of oversight committees, operations committees, things that might not be directly related to being the CCO, but I think ultimately inform my work and help me be visible to the business so that way when something does go wrong, they feel like they have that relationship and can reach out.
Yeah, Jessica, I think that's an interesting point, because one of the things I had jotted down as a note to myself that I didn't mention is sort of the amount of time that I spend with my fellow CCOs and other peers in the compliance department talking about things that maybe you're not trained to do as a compliance professional. So we spend a lot of time talking about developing our teams, diversity and inclusion, budget. That's not something that I had a huge amount of background in, but sort of how do you manage to a budget? We're about 150 compliance professionals in the United States. So making sure that we are keeping an eye towards our spend. Technology. We increasingly are incorporating technology into our compliance programs and running large-scale technology implementation programs within compliance, which is not something that a lot of us have significant background in either. So the skills that it requires to be, sort of in this role are have really stretched me beyond sort of what my initial training was when I first came into this profession. Okay. With that, we thought we would turn to, something that Mark, I think you had touched on a little bit when you were doing the poll, but just getting a sense from folks are, what do you think are the best parts of your job, and what do you think are the worst parts of your job?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, sure.
It's the same answer, I think, for me, both. I love the breadth of the job, and I hate the breadth of the job. It's really challenging. I mean, Claire and Jessica and Mark have talked about all the different aspects of the job, and that's what, makes it, again, intellectually stimulating. You're always learning something new every single day about something, which is great. But then just sort of going home and thinking about, oh, I didn't cover this, or what about such and such, or I haven't heard about X in a few weeks. I wonder how that's going. So it's really a double-edged sword from my perspective.
So I'd say what I like the best is advising the business. If I could do that all day, I'd be very happy. But as we've all kind of alluded to, there's a lot of other responsibilities, a lot of other constituents besides the business. And so I think learning the business and developing relationships, I think two keys to being an effective CCO is something I very much like to do. I try to attend their town halls and get invited to their morning meetings and try to get my staff to do it as much as possible. I like when I'm, me and my department are seen as adding value and we feel like we're being respected, and that people understand our role as a business protector. What I like least is something I call feeding the beast. All the management reporting I have to do, and as part of a large bank, they want a lot of information. They often want it very quickly, often without a full appreciation of the other work we need to do. So that's one of the things I like less. I think there's sometimes concerns in a large organization about the lack of accountability. Again, we have all these people who are working for us in effect, but not reporting to us. So that's sometimes a challenge. How people view compliance, when they don't see the value we add, or they see us as just people taking away revenue without understanding, the role we play, that's sort of a pet peeve.
I guess I would add to that. So for me, one of the things I enjoy the most is just the relationships. I think that's been really great, even just in the first few months, the number of committees and things that I've been added to just sort of expand that platform and have an opportunity to persuade and influence, I think, is really great, and to really help people understand why compliance is important in the business. So a lot of what Mark said resonates with me. And maybe not something I don't like, but like a little less, I'll change the question slightly, would just be the administration. There's a lot of just nuts and bolts of timekeeping and managing a team and ticking boxes with HR and overseeing things that stretch you in ways that are a little bit outside of your expertise as a compliance professional, kind of similar to what Claire was sharing.
Yeah, and I would say, similarly, probably my best and worst are the same things. So trying to get folks excited about compliance is both a great part of my job and also a really hard part of my job. I always tell folks my 9-year-old son once referred to my role as that of being the chief compliance blah, blah, blah. And I think actually my business partners feel that way sometimes. So it's not always the sexiest of jobs. And I think it is incredibly rewarding, though, when you have established a close relationship with your business partners. They understand the value you bring, like Mark mentioned. And that you hear them sort of repeating your words in a meeting, right? I think that's, and they say it without sort of cringing. And so I think that is both challenging to get to that point. You have to establish a lot of trust. You have to partner with people over time so that they understand that you are there to help them, and that you are in it to have the business succeed just the same way they are. But it it's rewarding when that happens. So let's turn to maybe a question that could help some folks out in the room. How are you guys ensuring that your compliance program evolves effectively to keep up with regulatory change, to keep up with sort of changes to your firm's risk profile, just changes to the products and services offered in your business? How do you stay on top of stuff?
So I guess I can take that one. I mean, that for sure I would say is a team effort, right? We have over 8,000 employees almost now, or we're getting close to that number. So the business is always evolving. There is always a new idea that is brewing somewhere. And so I don't want to sound like a broken record, but that is where the relationship management is really key. Internally and then also externally, I think also with regulators, kind of being close to your government relations team, knowing what issues are important to you. I think that's kind of key for us as well. We have folks that focus on reviewing risk alerts and making sure that we're following through on those. So, but it really is a team effort. I absolutely could not do it by myself, and you really do have to have that trust in your team and really make sure that you have folks supporting you that know where to focus their time and energy. So I do think I spend a lot of time just trying to help people prioritize and know what's important to the compliance program to make sure we are staying on top of those things. But it's absolutely a team effort. I can talk more about that in the Q&A if people want to go deeper, but that's it in a nutshell, I think.
And leverage the IAA. The IAA always does a terrific job. I've been in the industry, as I mentioned, for many years, and every firm that I've worked at has been a member of the IAA, and again, they do a wonderful job keeping their members abreast of changes that are going on. So that would be sort of a really important sort of centralized point that I would reference. I totally agree with you, though, Jessica. It's a team effort. And Claire, what you said about sort of their business partners sort of really understanding compliance, the value of compliance, then they'll bring you in sooner on. They'll understand, and they may not completely understand how a rule may apply, but they know that this might be something that could have an impact from a compliance perspective, and will bring you in. So I think that that's really important.
Yeah, to echo that, I think one of the things we do is just repeatedly emphasize with the businesses we support, you need to bring us in early. If you wait until you are 2 weeks away from the launch of something, you are probably not going to be able to launch because there is probably going to be something that you didn't think about that has a regulatory impact. So really sort of hammering home again and again, bring us in at the outset. We can help create guardrails for you to operate within, and then you can pull us back in once you get closer to the finish line. But we must be involved early. I think also making sure that we are plugged into the right forums, particularly the right business forums. So we have a lot of conversations about sort of this notion of seat at the table, and when do you get a seat at the table? When should compliance be at the table? And one of the things we have sort of talked about is the fact that we don't need a seat at every table. There are forums that we probably don't need to be involved in, and in fact, we're all happy to have time back for. But being involved in the right forums can make sure that you are getting the information that you need, that you're able to help provide that support and guidance, and that you're establishing sort of the relationships that'll help you stay connected. And then last, and I think Jessica, you hit on this a little bit. We actually, and this is really, really tactical, but we've actually put designated regulatory trackers, sort of people who are designated to be the rule trackers within our teams. And they're sort of in charge of making sure that for each of the different compliance programs or areas that we support, that there is one person who is sort of centralizing anything that's coming out, whether it's a rule proposal, whether it's a no action letter, whether it's an enforcement action, a risk alert, into one place. Doesn't mean that they are the ones doing all the analysis or that they are the ones doing all the communication out to the business, but just someone who makes sure that we have got everything in one place and that we have clear owners. And I think that is something, given just how active the regulatory environment is, that can help make sure that you're staying on top of regulatory developments. Mark, anything
Claire,
you
we
would
do it a
wanna-
little bit differently at JPMorgan. Like, I have someone on my team who is the regulatory developments person. Of course, so she gets. We use a vendor, so we get like the basic feeds, and then she's checking all the websites for the different regulators on a lot of different mailing lists of law firms and others. But then each of the people that have expertise in the different areas are subject matter experts. Are supposed to be feeding in to her like the list, and it's more than just a list. It's what are we going to do about this, and who should be. Because in a normal thing, we get an announcement, and I think the worst thing, and what I try to always explain is, if you just put out a note saying the SEC adopt or propose this rule, that's not very helpful. They can read the notice they'll be getting too. It's the do we think this is no impact at all, somewhat of an impact, a big impact, which businesses will it affect? So we do the initial business impact analysis. And then there's a formal committee that, when we meet with the business and go through that and do a handshake where they'll take it over if they agree. It's going to impact the business and eventually form a working group and get to, a business as usual resolution. So that's how we handle regulatory developments. I mean, I think the other parts of an evolving program, we're going to talk about technology more, but I think there's a lot of hype around technology. I think there's a lot of expectations around use of technology by regulators and others. And in some ways, it really could make the job easier, could make people more effective, more efficient. But I think in some ways, it's much more natural. When you're doing surveillance and you're looking through large amounts of data to try to identify problems. In like if you're doing employee, personal account dealing, monitoring, or trade surveillance. So like some of the surveillance activities are easier. How do you use technology when you're giving advice? And how do you have metrics on how much money you've saved the firm by avoiding a bad regulatory finding or saving them from reputational harm? So it's just definitely we should be all thinking about technology and how it could change us. I know we spend a lot of time in compliance here on transformational matters where we try to think like how can we really move the dial here? How can we do things more efficiently? We've been over the last year really looking at the activities we conduct to say which ones that we do are bearing fruit and we're actually finding problems versus which ones we never see a problem. Well, why don't we stop doing that and think about where our risks are and use the time we'll save by cutting the non-effective ones by finding higher risk and doing activity to see what's going on there. I think also, I forgot now who mentioned the fact that they have, what you call them, business. Well, we're about to launch global leads, right? Because we have global businesses. And so we want a single person that the business can go to with all their questions, accountable to the business, even though they're going to have to rely on a lot of different subject matter experts, people who help those businesses today. That helps us make sure we're supporting the business, make sure we're more aware of the business, hopefully adding better value at the right level. And I think it was Claire saying getting the right seats at the right tables.
Yeah, so Mark, I want to pick up on a theme that you've been talking about, which is sort of how do you, as a compliance professional, as a CCO, demonstrate value to your business partners? I think we all know that we are not bringing in sort of the profits, and being able to demonstrate your value can be really important in terms of getting businesses to want to allocate more resources to the compliance department. Mark, you hit on one of my own personal pet peeves, and it's a small one, but I feel like I am constantly harping on my team, don't just forward a link, right? Don't just forward a link to your business partners. They probably got the same Ignites article that you did, and they can read. What you need to be doing is actually talking to them about why whatever it is that has come through is important, how it impacts the business, and sort of what we might need to do to close any gaps that we see, if it's a rule proposal or a risk alert, and to let them know that we are going to be supporting them. And again, by just forwarding a link, you don't get there. But what are other ways that folks have found that they can help demonstrate their value to their business partners?
We keep a lot of metrics in our compliance area, and I'm having much more of an appreciation now that we've started to track things, because you're able to see trends over time, and those trends can tell a story. So sometimes you're able to, for example, be more efficient, or help your business partners be more efficient in terms of things that they can do. We keep records, for example, in the investment compliance department about when we've prevented errors, because my team does that. So obviously that's a very sort of tangible example, and the business very much appreciates that. I think at our business they have a very good understanding of how important having a good compliance program is to clients. So we don't have, obviously, regulatory exams. That's sort of your big test. But we have, obviously, regular audits or other types of testing that's done. And when those results are positive, obviously that's a good thing. Even when they're not positive, much better to find it internally than externally. So I think it is hard to sort of get your arms around things, but I think there are ways to do that, and those are some examples.
Maybe just one more that I would add is, I think this is where just understanding and truly knowing your business is critical. So I think we get the best feedback not from metrics or clean exams, which are important things, but we get the best feedback when people feel like you really value and understand their business challenges. And so I think that's really critical for us. I always try to encourage people in my team, never just say no, right? The answer shouldn't be no. It should be, we can't do that, but let's think about what we can do. I know this about your business. Could we consider another option? And that may or may not be the option that we ultimately take, but starting that conversation in a different way with some demonstration of a knowledge and understanding of the business and whatever the challenges are in that particular business line, I think is where we think we add value, and it's probably why and how we get a seat at the table in so many groups and oversight committees.
And I'll add another pet peeve is when someone on my staff comes to me and said, oh, someone very senior asked me this question, and they're very proud, and I knew the answer, and I gave them this answer. And I said, okay, great. Why'd they ask that question? Oh, I don't know. Like, you just missed an opportunity to find out, like, the bigger picture, like, what's going on. Like, they asked you this very specific question, but there was something driving that question. And you giving an answer without knowing why, puts us in a position, whatever you said maybe yes to or gave an answer, they can maybe launch a new product or service, and then how do we know we're have adequate resources to support that and cover it? So you wasted the opportunity when somebody comes to you with a question to learn more and see the bigger picture. And then I'd say, as far as metrics, I find that a picture has a lot of value, and people you come out with all this charts and different things, but if you can show that pie chart or show it in a good way, it'll resonate much more with people. And then the other thing to demonstrating our value, I think, is showing how compliance protects the business in the long term. we facilitate business, but we do it, make sure everything's being done in a compliant way. And that's that tough balance of, being seen as an advisor, being seen as commercial and practical and creative on the one hand, but being, needing to pull out the cop's hat on the other hand and say, you know what, I think you're taking too much risk, or, I'm not comfortable with that, and if you want to pursue, you're going to have to escalate it up higher. It doesn't always win you friends, but I think it wins you a lot of respect, and that's the job at the end of the day, protecting the franchise and saving the business from itself sometimes.
Thanks, Mark. Well, we want to make sure that we are able to fit in any questions. We've got some other prepared content that we can talk about up here, but are there any questions out in the audience? Either folks want to raise their hand, or if we've got any cards where questions have been passed in. Happy to answer. Okay, we can keep going. We can come back to it as well, so we'll check back in a minute. One of the things we thought that could be interesting is talking about how folks are leveraging data to drive their compliance programs. So that's something I think, particularly in large firms, is increasingly becoming an area of focus. I know at Vanguard we are actually building out our own data analytics capabilities within the compliance department. So creating our own data lake and creating the ability really for us to perform a lot of our own sort of data mining, data production to regulators without necessarily needing to rely on business partners. So I don't know if folks have thoughts about how sort of within their compliance programs they are leveraging data.
So we have a couple different ways that we're doing this. I think, data analytics have been part of our compliance testing program for a while, and it's an increasing focus for us, both in sort of the testing itself, and I think the next phase of that will be how we prioritize the testing. Are there analytics around trading patterns or other things that might help us focus on higher risk areas over time? And then I just think broadly, not ring fenced to the CCO role, but just broadly across legal compliance, technology is becoming more important, right? We're using more technology for ownership reporting. We're using more technology for our code of ethics reviews and our trading analytics. So it's becoming part of, obviously it's a big part of the business, but it's also something that we're just starting to use more and more every day. Maybe just for color, we have a recent early career hire that we have in the department who has a data science minor, and we've been seeing some really amazing dashboards and programming and things there. So it's a nascent area for us, but it was just sort of interesting and eye-opening for me to see somebody coming kind of relatively early career, a few years out of college, and the things that they're able to do with Alteryx and some of the other data programs can do some of the work that we have, otherwise we're taking people a week to do in a couple of minutes or hours. So there's some really powerful stuff. I think you have to be careful with it and be thoughtful about it and start small and grow bigger over time. But my view would be over time that's going to become a huge part of how we do our jobs.
Yeah, as I say, Jessica, I think that highlights the fact that as folks are building out compliance programs, building out teams, that there are skill sets that are becoming increasingly important for compliance professionals that maybe historically weren't. So we have, as we have built out our data analytics program, we actually, the head of that program has zero compliance background, but has a ton of data background and has brought a data scientist onto his team to help basically interact, sort of be the translator, right, with the other compliance folks around the data itself and how we might think about mining that. One of the things they have cautioned us is, you can look at data in different ways and get a false story about what's going on if you aren't looking at it the right way. And so sort of they have been helping us think about how you look at the data and how you interpret it. And they also, I think, an example in our financial crimes program is that they have really been taking a look at their data, and somebody highlighted this before to say, where have we not been having any results based on alerts that we are looking at or processes that we are following? If we aren't getting any results or we aren't getting any hits, should we keep doing this? Is it value add or not? And so they are really using data to drive those types of discussions to make sure that they're using resources efficiently and really focusing on risk areas rather than just continuing to do things for the sake of doing them.
That sounds similar to what we're doing. Oh, sorry, Mark. It's
No, go ahead.
At my firm, we're not creating a data lake, but there is a lot of sort of data analytics that we're doing, specifically on the trade surveillance side. It's challenging in some ways. You may think about you're trying to sort of look for a needle in a haystack, but leveraging different types of technology really can help you sort of mine the data and really find things that are valuable. So we recently implemented a third-party tool that's helping us to sort of look at trading information and identify certain types of trading patterns that may warrant further investigation. And as I said, it's really helped us to be much more efficient and much more effective with our time and resources.
So I was going to say that JPMorgan, you got to kind of break it down from business's use of technology, which we do need to follow and understand what they're doing, and compliance's use. Huge amounts, like multi-billion-dollar amounts by the business, and compliance also has a pretty huge budget in terms of what we do. And I'm seeing all sorts of groups. We had something called Intelligent Digital Solutions that came up last year, where they do. It's amazing some of the analytics that they do, where they'll take 20 years worth of data we have about earnings calls, and you could show trends from it by like how a CEO, what words he uses, and what tone he takes. They can actually recognize tone, and you have this long amount, a huge amount of data saying what's the likely impact of that word. It's just incredible watching that grow and thinking about how we use it and how can we protect the business when they're using it. But it does lead to what I call scope creep, right? Where there's these expectations that, again, the buck stops with you as a CCO, and you're expected to know about technology, or at least know enough about it to explain it, to be able to use it or get the right help you need to employ it. But then, it also starts to go to things like cybersecurity. I've been through exams where, they're drilling me on what I knew about our cyber program and, how I could explain it. We had the issue with algorithms and, whether or not the chief compliance officer should have done more, understand more the algo and how it maybe didn't work as intended. Now it's liquidity risk. Derivatives officers are going to have to be named. So, a lot of shops, they sometimes, when there's no natural person, they look to the CCO. And I think, as Claire said, we weren't trained for that, and our skill sets may not lend to that. But, you have to get the right support and the people that can explain it so you know enough to ask intelligent questions.
Maybe I'll just add on to that, Mark. My 2 cents would be, if you think you're going to be in this role for the next 10 or 15 years or over kind of the course of a career, learn it now. Like, I'll give the SEC, this is just my view. This is not necessarily the view of everyone else at the Capital Group, and there's definitely different levels of skepticism about technology, but just when I see the trends in the business, and not just at CG, but across kind of the industry, we all have to learn about technology if we're going to be in this for the long haul, because that's going to be where the risk is over time. I feel that really strongly. I'm happy to talk about that more or less, but I think it's not going to be enough to say we're not trained for it over time. I think that's fine for now, but I think as this job evolves and as the industry evolves, we're going to have to learn it.
So we did get an audience question that I wanted to make sure we got to. So the question is, and if we misinterpret the question, please feel free to chime in, but how do you choose topics for annual compliance meetings? And we probably could also touch a little bit on training as well, if that's in line with that, but I'll throw that to folks in terms of how they go about that process.
I'm happy to get started. There are certain core policies that we have traditionally covered in our annual compliance training. And I should step back and mention, typically our annual compliance training is driven in part by our enterprise area. So there's certain topics that we really don't get to weigh in on. They come down from our parent organization, and that's part of our training module. But we supplement that with specific training on policies that are specific to our line of business. As I mentioned, oftentimes it's sort of the core policies. It's always important to just reinforce your material non-public information policy, your personal trading policy, and things along those lines. But of course, every year we tweak it. We do that based on a number of different factors. If there have been changes to a policy, we take into consideration if we started to see a trend, if maybe there were issues, and it may signify that there's sort of a misunderstanding with respect to a policy. But we try to engage our business partners. We have sort of what we would call compliance ambassadors. I think you were saying that, Jessica, in our business, who thankfully, we work very, very closely with. And we will engage their input as well, because it's important for to sort of tap into sort of their knowledge and what they're seeing as well, and take that into account as well as part of our development of our compliance training.
So I'd say I always view training as a form of insurance, and I think it usually pays dividends. If you can use every opportunity to remind your people or emphasize something, or introduce a new requirement, either a regulatory rule or an internal policy, well worth it. I think that was Lee talking. We have something very similar here at JPMorgan, where there is the corporate training that's mandatory online. It's so across the firm, everybody has to do it. We supplement the 30 or so annual training courses with classroom training, what we call ad hoc training that we design specifically for various businesses. It's come about either because we've had a regulatory request to do something, or we've identified a weakness, or the business sometimes just asks us to do training. So the content of that and how we choose topics will depend on the area. There's sort of like the annual compliance meeting for the registered representatives, and there's ones that I led this year on equity and fixed income. And so, the starting point is usually, what did we talk about last year? But what I really try to do is, we just, again, don't use this, just regurgitate the rules. Let's talk about what's changed since last year. What new business developments have happened? What new market developments, regulatory side? What cases can we learn lessons from? I try to get people to say, what are the most common questions you get in the different areas, like personal account dealing or outside business activities? What are the most common problems you see? And I think we try to really use real-life case studies. Sometimes we protect the innocent and change the name, but I think people often can figure out, this was a good example. And so what happened here? And how did the lack of them giving timely notice to the control room about material non-public information cause a problem? What do we do about it? So again, we come at it from both ways. There's the corporate enterprise training, and then there's the ad hoc, much closer to the business training. And my tip here is that there's often business fatigue. They say you do too much training, and so we take that seriously, and we've been trying to think, do we need this training every year? What's the real risk? How many problems have we had? So think about the frequency of the training. But that's always balanced against, when you have a regulatory problem or litigation, one of the first things they're going to say is, did you train your people on this? As if you could train on every single subject and sub-subject. So you got to create that right balance.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly chime in. In addition to sort of mandatory trainings at Vanguard, we actually have an annual compliance conference every year that is put on. Our CEO attends, our managing directors attend, and then senior leaders from across the organization attend as well. We usually have a couple of sessions. It's usually 2 to 3 hours long that align to a particular theme. Just to give you some examples, the year the DOL rule came out, we actually had a theme around just fiduciary duty. Like, what is it? When are you acting as a fiduciary? I think that can be a confusing concept to the business. So, shaped that whole conference around that to try to help people provide context. They keep hearing about this DOL rule, and I don't think for a lot of folks they had sort of the underlying foundation they needed in order to be able to understand what was going on. This past year, we did something a little bit different. The theme was compliance as a competitive advantage. We had some external speakers in from non-financial services companies who talked about how compliance actually drives their business. And we had a former SEC commissioner as well. We might have lost Mark. So we have done different things with that conference, but have had a lot of support from senior management in putting that on every year. So a number of questions coming in right at the end. Unfortunately, I'm not sure we'll be able to get to all of these, but maybe one that I don't think we've touched on is sort of, understanding the importance of particularly in large firms, being able to rely on your teams. Any tips we have around professional development and around employee retention? And so maybe I know that's opening up a can of worms right at the end. Anything rocket round along that?
We've got at least 2 seconds left based on the clock in front of me, so I can cover that. I mean, we have a lot of challenges just around recruiting and retention, especially for those firms that are on the West Coast. It's a smaller talent base. I don't know that I have cracked the nut on that one, but certainly I have developed a very good relationship with our recruiting team and spent a lot of time helping them understand the skills that we need and how to stay in touch on LinkedIn and other things. Around retention, I would say it's mostly just being a really engaged manager, which is probably a session all by itself, so I will stop there, but it's really just being supportive of your team and being engaged with your people.
Yeah, one quick thing I know folks want to get out. We actually created a rallying cry within the compliance department last year. It was "Compliance is cool." The head of U.S. compliance actually had stickers that were printed up that said "Compliance is cool." He basically, folks would stop by to tell him something they were working on, and he would give them a sticker. Folks now have them on their laptops. Our CEO actually asked for one when he saw them. So sometimes just something simple as sort of a common rallying cry, mission, purpose can help on that retention front. I can't say a sticker's not going to solve everything. I'm not suggesting it will, but it is a different thing that we have tried.
Just really quick from me, I would say make sure you know that there's plenty of work to do. So there are opportunities for people to maybe get involved in other types of projects and maybe get involved in a cross-functional project. And that's another way for people to develop and stay engaged. I'm happy to delegate work when I can and train people as well. So yeah, thank you.
All right, well, on that note, I know folks are probably eager to get to, I believe we have a break next. So thank you all. The panelists will stay up here. If you have questions, please feel free to approach them.